Jamal Carter pressed the button on his car fob. The locks clicked. He slid into the driver's seat, adjusting his jacket. Across the street, a cluster of young men leaned against a rusted chain-link fence, eyes fixed, smirks spreading. "Hey, look who thinks he belongs here," one called. "Someone tell him the projects are 5 miles south." Jamal's hands stayed on the wheel. He said nothing. One of the men spat onto the curb and laughed, nudging his friend. The message was clear. He was in the wrong place, not because of what he had, but because of who he was. A police cruiser rolled up slowly. One officer stepped out, eyes narrowing. His gaze lingered on Jamal, scanning, calculating. He reached toward his belt, brushing the holster without drawing. "Is this your car, pal?" the officer said, voice sharp, edge thick with disbelief. "Or did you find the keys in that briefcase?" Jamal's thumb rested lightly on the edge of his ID badge in the inner pocket of his jacket. He didn't speak. The officer's eyes flicked to the briefcase, lingering just a fraction too long, suspicion written in every line of his face. The young men across the street laughed again, louder this time. Their heads bobbed, approving, convinced they were witnessing authority confirm their mockery. Jamal exhaled slowly, unclipping his ID from the inner pocket and placing it on the dashboard, the polished card catching the sunlight. The officer's hand twitched toward it, but Jamal didn't flinch. His silence, precise and deliberate, carried weight. Every second stretched, charged. The city moved around them. Cars, pedestrians, dogs barking, but none of it mattered. All attention centered on Jamal and the officer, on what the officer assumed he knew and what he was about to realize. Jamal Carter stepped off the elevator on the 18th floor, briefcase in hand. The polished floors reflected the authority he carried as a DOJ attorney, but authority didn't erase prejudice. As he approached his office, a junior attorney muttered loud enough for a few nearby colleagues to hear. "I bet his badge is the only thing keeping him from a stop-and frisk on his way home." Jamal's fingers brushed the briefcase strap, his face neutral. No reaction. Every step forward reinforced the quiet assertion that he belonged here. In the lobby, a security guard waved 2 white associates through without a glance. Then he stepped directly into Jamal's path. "Hold it. ID," he said, voice firm, eyes scanning Jamal as if expecting deception. Jamal produced the badge, sliding it slowly across his palm. The guard's fingers lingered an extra moment over the ID, studying him, before finally stepping aside. Even small interactions carried bias. At the cafeteria, a delivery man wheeled a cart toward the lobby doors. Seeing Jamal, he froze. "Hey, the loading dock is around the back, man. You can't bring those crates through the lobby," he said, voice sharp and dismissive. The words hit like a gut punch. Though Jamal wore a tailored suit and carried no crates, he was automatically assumed to be a laborer, an intruder in a world meant for others. Jamal smiled faintly, collected his tray, and moved past, each measured step leaving no room for confrontation yet communicating control. Later, in a conference room, Jamal set files on the table for a briefing. Colleagues filtered in, murmuring under their breath. One young attorney leaned toward a peer and whispered, "I wonder if he even had to show his credentials to avoid a stop on the street." Jamal didn't respond. He arranged the files with precision, sliding the top sheet to reveal case notes documenting police misconduct and discriminatory housing rulings. The subtle irony wasn't lost on him. While some doubted his authority, the evidence of systemic injustice in his hands proved it. Throughout the afternoon, the tension escalated. A coworker holding the door for Jamal hesitated a beat too long, eyes darting suspiciously. The cleaning staff glanced at him twice as he passed, their expressions polite but tight. Each microaggression stacked atop the last, invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention, but Jamal noticed everything. By late afternoon, he returned to his office, leaving the conference room. He paused by the window, watching the city glow as the sun dipped low. The briefcase rested at his side. Inside, his ID glinted in the fading light, a quiet reminder of the authority he carried. Calm, precise, and entirely aware, Jamal knew that the people who doubted him would soon see the truth. They assumed he was ordinary. They assumed he was weak. They were wrong. Even as he adjusted his jacket and collected his notes, Jamal's mind ticked forward to the encounter from that morning. The youths laughing, the police officer's eyes narrowing, the invisible boundaries imposed by assumptions. They were not distractions. They were fuel. Every slight, every misjudgment sharpened his focus, readying him for the moment when appearances would shatter. No lecture, no sighs of frustration, no hand-wringing. Jamal moved through the office like a quiet storm, each gesture measured, each step deliberate. Every observer, colleague, guard, delivery worker could see the outward calm. None suspected the force beneath it. None realized that authority could manifest not in anger, but in precision and revelation. The badge on his briefcase caught the last rays of sunlight. He exhaled, not with relief, but with calculated anticipation. Soon, the misconceptions, the microaggressions, the casual prejudice, everything that underestimated him, would collide with the undeniable truth of who Jamal Carter really was. And when that moment arrived, no one in that building, on that street, or across the city block would forget it. The late afternoon sun was slanting across Maple Street when Jamal Carter reached his car. The polished leather of the driver's seat felt familiar under his fingers, but the calm of the day was about to fracture. Across the street, the same group of young men from that morning leaned against the fence, arms crossed, smirks still in place. Jamal didn't look at them. He unlocked the car and slid inside, the engines hum a low anchor. But the laughter followed him, faint at first, then louder as if energized by the arrival of authority. One of the men shouted across the street, "Better check your GPS, lawyer, this isn't your block." Before he could start the car, a police cruiser rolled up slowly from the opposite direction. Tires crunching against the asphalt, the vehicle stopped abruptly beside him. A tall officer stepped out, the sun glinting off his badge, but his eyes narrowed, fixed on Jamal as if his very presence was a puzzle to be solved. "Afternoon, sir," the officer began, tone sharp, the kind that carried both command and disbelief. But then he added with a smirk that spoke volumes, "Is this your car, or did you borrow it from that briefcase of yours?" Jamal's hand brushed the edge of his ID tucked inside his jacket pocket. He didn't speak, calm, controlled, deliberate. The officer took a step closer, fingers brushing the holster. The air between them felt charged, taut, as if the slightest twitch could ignite confrontation. Across the street, the youths laughed again, emboldened by authority seeming to echo their own prejudice. One of them made a vague gesture toward the car, as if daring the officer to act, to confirm the assumption that this black man didn't belong here. "Step out of the car, son," the officer said, voice louder this time. He didn't use sir, he used a diminutive, a subtle claim of dominance. Jamal's jaw tightened, but he didn't move hastily. He unbuttoned his jacket and removed his ID slowly, placing it on the dashboard so the sunlight hit it just right, reflecting the federal seal. The officer's eyes flicked to it. A pause, a subtle hitch in the breath. He reached toward it, but Jamal's calm precision didn't flinch. The moment stretched. The laughter across the street faltered. The young men could sense the shift, tension threading through the air like an electric wire. "Badge," the officer muttered, almost to himself, as if confirming a truth he didn't want to admit. His hand hovered over the ID. Jamal met his gaze evenly, a faint smile playing on his lips, not mocking, just assured. "Let me see some identification," another officer called from the driver's side, moving cautiously toward the passenger door. The word identification came out heavy, weighted with doubt, suspicion, disbelief. Jamal reached inside the briefcase on the seat beside him and withdrew a polished, embossed card. His federal credentials, his authority, undeniable. The second officer's eyes widened. His posture shifted slightly, the challenge momentarily replaced by shock. Jamal placed the ID on the console so it was fully visible, the sunlight making the gold lettering gleam. He didn't speak. The officer's assumptions, their bias, were meeting an unshakable truth. DOJ, Civil Rights Division. The first officer finally managed, voice strained. Jamal gave a small, calm nod. The silence hung. Across the street, the group of youths stopped laughing entirely, their smirks dissolving. The power dynamic had shifted in an instant. The man they had mocked, the officer they assumed they understood, now radiated authority so unmistakable that disbelief trembled on their faces. The taller officer finally swallowed and stepped back slightly, as if physically encountering the weight of Jamal's presence. His hand drifted from the holster to the brim of his hat, unsure how to act. His voice, which had been sharp and commanding moments ago, had lost the bite. Jamal remained still, eyes calm, every movement precise. The other officer, younger and hesitant, glanced at his partner, then back at Jamal, silently acknowledging the shift. No words could undo the assumptions that had brought them here, but the proof now shone, undeniable, glinting gold against the dashboard. The street felt quieter, almost suspended. The sun caught the badge again, bright and official. Jamal's presence, poised and unwavering, spoke louder than any argument, louder than any command. Authority, earned through knowledge, integrity, and persistence, now stood visibly, incontrovertibly, before them. Finally, the first officer exhaled slowly, hand dropping from the holster, a mixture of relief and embarrassment flickering in his expression. "Yes, sir, my mistake," he muttered, stepping back fully, tension still visible but contained. The young men on the sidewalk glanced at one another, realization dawning. Their laughter had been premature, their assumptions shattered in a single, silent exchange. The irony was unmistakable. The man they thought powerless had command over the moment simply by being who he was. Jamal didn't gloat. He slid the ID back into his jacket pocket, adjusted his jacket, and started the car. The officers remained still, watching him, the hum of the engine a quiet punctuation to the lesson they had just received. As Jamal drove away, the air seemed to crackle with the impact of the incident. The street, once loud with mockery and disbelief, had been transformed into a space of stunned acknowledgement. The system of assumptions, the bias that had fueled casual prejudice all morning, had met a human embodiment of authority, and the collision was immediate, unmistakable. Behind him, the youths remained frozen for a beat longer than necessary. Their smirks had vanished, replaced by awkward glances. The officers exchanged silent looks, a tacit acknowledgement that authority and professionalism could not be doubted or diminished, even when layered beneath the guise of societal prejudice. Jamal's hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, eyes forward. Calm, controlled, calculated. Each encounter of the day, the mocking youths, the dismissive stares, the assumptions of authority, had been building to this precise moment. And now the shock radiated outward, rippling across the street, leaving an imprint impossible to ignore. The sun dipped lower, the light shifting across the pavement. Jamal drove on, leaving behind a lesson no words could convey, no argument could erase. The morning's mockery had met its reckoning, subtle yet powerful, and the message was clear. Assumptions, prejudice, and bias had no weight against truth and authority proven through competence, presence, and resolve. The street remained still for a heartbeat after Jamal drove off. The hum of his engine faded, leaving an almost deafening silence, punctuated only by the soft shuffling of feet and distant traffic. Across the street, the group of young men huddled together, eyes wide, voices caught in their throats. Their bravado from the morning had evaporated. The lesson had arrived in a single, quiet, unyielding moment. Did he just? One of them stammered, the words trailing off as if daring to complete the thought would make it real. Another shook his head, fumbling with his phone, as though documenting the encounter might rewrite what had just happened. They had expected humiliation, confirmation of their mockery, but instead, authority had walked up, silent, unwavering, and utterly undeniable. The officers lingered, too, unable to immediately reconcile the morning's assumptions with the reality before them. The first officer rubbed his forehead, eyes flicking to the dashboard of Jamal's now empty car. His hand lingered on the spot where the ID had caught the light, and he realized he had been confronted not with defiance, but with undeniable truth. Authority, competence, and dignity, all of it displayed effortlessly in a man who had done nothing to warrant their suspicion except exist in their world. Even as the tension dissipated, whispers began to ripple through the small crowd gathering on the sidewalk. A neighbor who had paused with her dog muttered under her breath, "I've never seen someone shut them up like that." A street vendor leaned on his cart, nodding toward the empty driver's seat. Respect. That's respect right there. For the first time that day, the incident wasn't a personal slight. It had become a lesson in perception and bias, a mirror reflecting their assumptions back at them. Inside the cruiser, the younger officer scrolled through his notes, uncertainty creeping into his posture. "Should we report this?" he asked hesitantly, glancing at his partner. The veteran officer shook his head, still processing, realizing that no report could fully capture the lesson they had just witnessed. Their authority as enforcers of the law had been subtly challenged, not through aggression, but by presence, skill, and the truth of credentials. Meanwhile, Jamal continued down Maple Street, every turn measured. His mind was not racing. It was observing, noting, and cataloging. Each reaction he had elicited, each moment of hesitation or awe, was a building block in the narrative of the day, a narrative that would ripple outward, showing people that assumptions based on skin color were fragile, easily dismantled by clarity and authority. Back on the sidewalk, the group of youths finally began to move, awkwardly, casting quick, guilty glances at one another. The laughter was gone, replaced now by silence and reflection. One of them muttered almost inaudibly, "Man, he wasn't what I thought." The words held the weight of shock, a rare acknowledgement that the world was larger and more complex than their assumptions had allowed. The police officers lingered longer than necessary, a subconscious need to regain control over an encounter they had assumed was already theirs. Each glance at the street, each half-step toward their vehicle, reminded them that authority could take many forms, some visible, some subtle, but all undeniable. The morning's prejudice had collided with competence, and for once the bias had no foothold. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Jamal's phone buzzed. A quick text from his assistant. Word is spreading fast. People are talking about what happened on Maple Street. A small, satisfied smile tugged at the corner of his lips. No gloating, no celebration, just quiet acknowledgement that his actions, calculated, calm, precise, had communicated a truth far louder than any argument or confrontation could have. The incident rippled further than immediate witnesses. Social media feeds began to murmur. Neighbors shared videos from their phones, and within hours, the encounter became a quiet legend on local channels. A black man assumed to be out of place, standing silent, commanding respect not through aggression but sheer authority. Every comment, every share amplified the lesson. Assumptions could be dismantled, but not without the courage to stand unwavering in one's truth. Even Jamal's colleagues discussed the event quietly among themselves, a mix of admiration and disbelief in their voices. Some had always known his credentials, his skill, his presence. Others, less observant, now had proof in front of them. This was a man whose calm authority could shock even those trained to wield power. The ripple effects extended into conversations, boardrooms, and street corners alike. By evening, the street itself seemed altered, almost reverent in memory of what had transpired. The laughter and mocking from the morning had been replaced by a cautious silence, a collective recognition that assumptions, when challenged by clarity and dignity, could crumble in an instant. For Jamal, the lesson was not for himself. It was for them, for the system, for everyone who assumed they understood a person by sight alone. The fallout was not loud or violent. There were no confrontations, no arguments, just a quiet, pervasive acknowledgement. And in that acknowledgement, the power of Jamal's calm, measured presence resonated far beyond Maple Street, planting seeds of reflection in all who had witnessed, directly or indirectly, the morning's events. By late afternoon, Jamal's office was quiet. He placed his briefcase on the conference table, letting the documents slide open just enough to reveal his credentials, ID cards, DOJ seals, and case files neatly aligned. He didn't need to speak. The weight of authority in his actions carried everything. A text buzzed on his phone. Video is everywhere. People can't stop talking about Maple Street. Jamal tapped it. The footage from the morning played. The young men mocking him, the officer leaning toward the holster, the deliberate calm as Jamal slid his ID onto the dashboard, catching the sunlight. Comments scrolled by. He handled that like a boss. Justice served cold. This is how you teach assumptions a lesson. Meanwhile, at the precinct, the officers were now facing accountability. The veteran leaned over the younger one. "You stopped a DOJ attorney for a broken tail light that wasn't even broken," he said, voice tight. "Prepare your statement. The captain is fuming." The younger officer swallowed hard, the reality of systemic overreach hitting him harder than any morning lecture ever could. Back on Maple Street, Jamal stepped out of the building, briefcase in hand. The same youths from the morning were still there, lingering against the fence, waiting, unsure, silent. Their earlier bravado was gone. Tension replaced it. One of them, voice small and almost fearful, muttered, "Sorry, sir." Jamal paused, nodded lightly, and continued toward his car. No words, no lecture, just measured steps, each one reinforcing the authority that had spoken louder than any argument. The boys stepped aside without another sound, the lesson embedded in their hesitation and respect. Sliding into the driver's seat, Jamal exhaled softly, the engine humming beneath him. The afternoon sun glinted off the polished dashboard and the badge tucked inside his briefcase. Silence followed him, more powerful than applause, more lasting than mockery. On his phone, the video played again. The comments kept rolling. Admiration, shock, validation. Finally, someone puts the system in check. This is the DOJ attorney they can't ignore. Jamal smiled faintly, not proud, not arrogant, just quietly satisfied. His calm had spoken volumes. The street, once loud with mockery and assumptions, was now subdued. The police officers, the witnesses, the bystanders, they all understood, without a single argument, that Jamal's presence, precision, and authority had delivered a verdict far beyond words. Jamal didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. He just needed to show them that justice doesn't just happen in courtrooms. It happens the moment you refuse to be what they expect. The evening settled over the city with a soft amber glow, long shadows stretching across Maple Street. Jamal walked calmly toward his car, briefcase in hand, his polished shoes clicking softly against the pavement. The street felt different now, less hostile, more tentative, as if the world had shifted subtly in the wake of what had happened earlier. The youths from that morning still lingered near the fence. Their earlier swagger was gone, replaced by a hesitant silence. One of them, swallowing hard, stepped aside, muttering, "Sorry, sir." Jamal didn't speak. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and slid into the driver's seat. The engine hummed, filling the quiet street. Every movement of his was precise, calm, a demonstration that authority need not shout to dominate. Across the street, the police cruiser still sat in the lot. The officers had returned to their vehicles, their posture stiff with awareness. The lesson of the morning, assumptions shattered by calm presence, was etched into their expressions. Even without words, the accountability was clear. They had been confronted by competence and dignity, and it was a confrontation they could not deflect. Jamal's phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification from a colleague. City Council heard about Maple Street. Social media is blowing up. They're asking for a statement about DOJ involvement in local oversight. Jamal smiled faintly. He didn't need to check the trending topics. He could feel the impact already, small, rippling, undeniable. One man's quiet authority had challenged assumptions, and the effect was multiplying. The youths had dispersed now, some heading home, others lingering a few steps behind, casting glances at Jamal's car. Their morning arrogance had dissolved, replaced by a new awareness. The world could not always be simplified into who belongs and who doesn't. Actions, presence, and composure could rewrite perception faster than any argument, faster than any insult. Jamal started the engine, the low rumble resonating across the asphalt. He eased the car onto the main street, moving with intention. The sun dipped behind the skyline, casting long shafts of light across the windshield. In that quiet glow, the street itself seemed to acknowledge the change. The tension had been replaced by subtle respect, the echoes of prejudice muted by the authority of presence. Even the bystanders, neighbors returning from evening errands, the street vendor closing up for the day, could not ignore the aura of calm control that clung to him. A small smile passed between two neighbors, wordlessly communicating what they had witnessed. Some lessons did not require a lecture. At the office, Jamal filed his case documents with meticulous care, but there was no sense of triumph in the movement. He wasn't proving anything to himself. The victory was external, quiet yet absolute. Assumptions had been dismantled, and dignity had prevailed. The impact would ripple further than he could measure, and that was enough. Before leaving entirely, Jamal paused by the elevator. A junior attorney hesitated near the doorway, eyes wide. "Sir, Maple Street, everyone's talking. They say you handled it perfectly." Jamal offered a small, calm nod. No explanation, no words of instruction, just acknowledgement. The point had been made, the lesson had been delivered. He stepped into the car once more, briefcase beside him, and drove off. The city lights flickered on, reflecting against the polished surface of the vehicle, shadows stretching long across the pavement. Silence followed him, not emptiness, but weight. It was a presence that could not be challenged, only recognized. Maple Street remained behind him, the scene of early morning tension now transformed into a quiet testament to authority, composure, and moral courage. The youths who had mocked him, the officers who had doubted him, the witnesses who had held their breath, they would carry the memory of this encounter far longer than they expected. Jamal didn't need to argue. He didn't need to raise his voice. He simply had to exist as himself, calm, precise, unwavering. The street, the city, and the people within it had been reminded, justice is not only a word in a courtroom. Sometimes it's the silent power of someone refusing to be what others expect. Days later, Maple Street carried a different air. The morning chaos, the mocking voices, the officers' suspicion, they felt like distant echoes, softened but not erased. Neighbors walked past each other with nods and quiet smiles, as if acknowledging the ripple of the event without a single word spoken. The youths from that morning no longer loitered by the fence. When they did appear, they kept to the sidewalks, giving a respectful distance. One glanced toward Jamal's office building, hesitated, and then muttered under his breath, he's not just anyone." The realization had settled in slowly, unspoken but unmistakable. Assumptions could be wrong, and respect had its own quiet authority. At the DOJ office, Jamal's colleagues discussed the incident in hushed tones, not as gossip, but as acknowledgement of the rare, precise moment when presence and truth could reshape perception. Emails circulated with links to the viral video, showing every calculated move, the ID on the dashboard, the officer's paused hand, the nod that ended mockery without a word. It wasn't just a story, it was a lesson in dignity, patience, and moral courage. Jamal himself moved through the day as always, calm, measured, focused on the work that truly mattered. He didn't linger on praise or notoriety. His satisfaction was subtle, internal. The street, the witnesses, the officers, the city, they had all learned something essential without him having to declare it. That was the power of quiet authority. It didn't demand attention, it earned it. In the evenings, he sometimes walked past Maple Street. The empty fence, the distant hum of traffic, the subtle rhythm of a neighborhood continuing its life, it all carried memory. The memory of a morning where assumptions were shattered, authority was displayed, and justice was quietly, undeniably served. Jamal didn't need to raise his voice to make a point. Every glance, every nod, every precise action had already spoken volumes. And in that silence, in that quiet demonstration, the truth remained. True heroes live quietly among us.